Felipe Martinez, a billionaire seeking truth, rebuilds a family diner to honor a legacy of love and second chances. As past deceptions collide with new beginnings, can trust and redemption triumph in the heart of the Watson family? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Felipe Martinez stood in his penthouse office, looking down at the bustling city below. At 45, he had everything most people dreamed of: billions in the bank, a successful real estate empire, and now the love of his life. But something was bothering him. "Mr. Martinez, your 2 o'clock appointment is here," his assistant, Sarah, announced through the intercom. "Cancel it," Felipe replied, still staring at the city. "Cancel everything for the next week." He couldn't stop thinking about Clara's words from their dinner last night. "I want you to meet my family before we announce our engagement," she had said, her beautiful brown eyes filled with hope. "They're simple people, Felipe, but they're my world." At 32, Clara Watson worked as a kindergarten teacher when Felipe first met her at a charity event 6 months ago. While other women at the gala wore designer dresses and dripped with jewelry, Clara stood out in her modest blue dress, genuinely engaging with the children from the foster home the event was supporting. Felipe smiled, remembering how she had no idea who he was when they first talked. She even argued with him about the importance of early childhood education, not knowing she was lecturing one of the city's wealthiest men. "They won't accept me," Felipe muttered to himself. He had seen it before, families changing completely when they discovered someone's wealth. Some became too eager to please, others grew resentful, but it was never natural, never real. Then, an idea struck him. Crazy. Yes, but it might just work. "Sarah," he called his assistant again, "get me Jack from security and tell him to bring some old clothes." 2 hours later, Felipe barely recognized himself in the mirror. His perfectly trimmed salt and pepper hair was now messy and unwashed. His designer suit had been replaced with worn-out jeans and a faded t-shirt. Jack had even helped him create some artificial stubble and dark circles under his eyes. "You sure about this, boss?" Jack asked, concerned. "Pretending to be homeless to meet your girlfriend's family. Sounds risky." Felipe adjusted the worn backpack on his shoulder. "Clara's different, Jack. She loves me for who I am, not what I have. I need to know if her family is the same." "And what exactly is your story going to be?" "An old friend of Clara's who's fallen on hard times. Lost my job, my home, everything. Just need a place to stay for a few days while I get back on my feet." Jack shook his head. "Miss Clara's going to be mad when she finds out." "Maybe," Felipe admitted. "But I need to know how they treat people when they think no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain." He had already called Clara using a disposable phone, setting up his story. She had been surprised, confused even, but her kind heart couldn't refuse helping an old friend in need. She didn't know it was Felipe's voice, slightly altered on the other end of the line. As Felipe rode the service elevator down to avoid being recognized by his regular staff, he felt a mix of excitement and guilt. He had built his fortune by being smart about people, by seeing through facades. But this was different. This was personal. The taxi dropped him off in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Small houses lined the street, some with tiny gardens, others with chairs on the porch where elderly neighbors sat watching the world go by. It was a far cry from his usual world of penthouses and country clubs. Standing in front of the modest 2-story house with peeling white paint and a small garden filled with sunflowers, Felipe took a deep breath. This was Clara's childhood home, the place that shaped the woman he loved. He could see movement behind, the curtains. Someone had noticed him standing there. This was it. No turning back now. Felipe adjusted his worn backpack one last time and walked up to the door, his heart pounding. Before he could knock, the door opened. There stood Clara, her eyes widening in surprise. For a terrifying moment, Felipe feared she would recognize him despite the disguise. But then she spoke, her voice filled with confusion. James Miller, I can't believe it's really you." Felipe felt a pang of guilt at the concern in her voice. He had created this fictional character, a supposed old friend from Clara's college days, and she had bought it completely. "Hey, Clara," he said softly, making his voice rougher than usual. I'm sorry to show up like this, but I didn't know where else to go. Behind Clara, he could see other faces appearing. An older woman with grey hair tied back in a bun, Clara's mother, Helena. A tall man with a suspicious frown, Jonas, the protective older brother. And peeking around them, a young woman who could only be Louisa, the youngest sister. The test was about to begin. Felipe steeled himself for what was to come, knowing that the next few days would either confirm his deepest hopes or his worst fears about the family of the woman he loved. What he didn't know was that this little deception would set in motion events that would change everyone's lives forever. Clara's mother, Helena, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. She wasn't happy about having a stranger in her house, and she made no effort to hide it. "Clara, honey, can I talk to you in the kitchen?" Helena asked, her eyes never leaving Felipe, who she knew as James. In the kitchen, Helena's voice was sharp but quiet. "We can't just take in every stray that shows up at our door. We barely have enough room as it is." "Mom, James isn't a stray," Clara insisted. "He was one of my best friends in college. He's just going through a rough time." Back in the living room, Felipe sat uncomfortably on the edge of an old floral sofa. Jonas, Clara's brother, stood leaning against the wall, watching him like a hawk. "So, James," Jonas said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "what exactly happened to you last? Clara told us you were doing great in Chicago." Felipe had prepared for these questions. "Lost my job when the company downsized. Then my wife left, taking everything. It's been a tough year." "And of all the people you know, you came to Clara for help?" Jonas wasn't buying it. Louisa, the youngest sister, came bouncing into the room with a cup of tea. Unlike the others, her face showed genuine concern. "Here you go, James. It must have been hard losing everything like that." "Thank you," Felipe said, taking the tea. He noticed it was served in a chipped Mickey Mouse mug, probably a childhood remnant. Clara returned from the kitchen, her face slightly flushed from arguing with her mother. "James can stay in the spare room upstairs. It's small, but—" "Absolutely not," Helena interrupted, following behind her. "If he has to stay, he'll sleep on the couch. I'm not having a strange man upstairs near the girls' rooms." Felipe watched, Clara's face fall. This was the side of her family she had never shown him. The arguments, the tension, the real dynamics behind closed doors. "The couch is fine," he said quickly. "I'm grateful for anything." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Felipe lay on the lumpy couch, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked and settled around him. It was so different from his silent, perfectly climate-controlled penthouse. He heard soft footsteps and quickly closed his eyes, pretending to sleep. It was Louisa heading to the kitchen for a late-night snack. "Oh," she gasped softly, noticing he was awake. "I'm sorry. Did I wake—" "You?" "No, just having trouble sleeping," Felipe admitted. Louisa sat on the armchair nearby, munching on cookies. "Want one? They're store brand, but they're pretty good." Felipe took a cookie, remembering the imported Italian biscotti in his office. These simple chocolate chip cookies somehow tasted better. "You know," Louisa said thoughtfully, "Clara's different since she met her new boyfriend, happier. She won't tell us much about him, though." Felipe's heart skipped a beat. "Oh?" "Mom's convinced he must be horrible, or Clara would have brought him around by now. Jonas thinks he's probably married, but I think Clara's just worried we're not good enough for him." "Why would she think that?" Louisa shrugged. "We're not exactly fancy people. You should see Clara now. She's got new clothes, goes to nice restaurants. Sometimes I think she's embarrassed by us." Felipe felt a knot in his stomach. Was that true? Was Clara ashamed of her family? Their conversation was interrupted by Jonas, appearing in the doorway. "It's late, Louisa. Go to bed." Louisa rolled her eyes, but got up. "Good night, James. Don't let the bedbugs bite." Jonas waited until his sister was upstairs before turning to Felipe. "Let me make something clear. I don't trust you. One wrong move and you're out. Got it?" "Got it," Felipe replied, calmly meeting Jonas's stare. After Jonas left, Felipe pulled his thin blanket tighter, the protectiveness he could understand, even admire. But there was something else in Jonas's attitude, a bitterness that seemed to run deeper. Around midnight, he heard Clara's voice upstairs, talking softly on the phone. She was probably calling him, the real him, for their nightly chat. What would she say if she knew he was right here, lying on her family's couch? The next morning, Felipe woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Helena in the kitchen. She was talking to someone on the phone. "I don't like it, Martha," she was saying to her friend. "Clara brings home this suspicious-looking man, expects us to just take him in. Ever since she started dating that rich boyfriend of hers, she's been making strange decisions." Felipe lay very still, listening. "No, we still haven't met him. Probably thinks we're too common for his taste. And now this? I'm telling you, Martha, something's not right. This James person shows up out of nowhere, with only Clara's word about who he is." Felipe closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his deception. He had wanted to test Clara's family, but they were testing him too in ways he hadn't expected. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made him quickly pretend to be asleep again. It was Clara getting ready to leave for work. She stopped by the EU couch, and Felipe felt her presence nearby. "I'm sorry about everyone," she whispered, thinking he was asleep. "They're good people, they're just protective. Please don't make me regret helping you." As Clara left for work, Felipe lay there thinking about her words. He had started this deception to test her family's character, but now he was seeing sides of Clara he had never known existed. The way she stood up to her family, her quiet strength, the burden she carried trying to bridge two different worlds. The day ahead would bring more revelations, more tests, and more moments of truth. But for now, Felipe Martinez, billionaire, real estate mogul, lay on a lumpy couch in a modest house, listening to a mother's worried phone conversation and wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. The morning sun streamed through the living room windows as Felipe helped Helena with the breakfast dishes. He had offered to help, hoping to get on her good side. She hadn't smiled, but she hadn't refused either. "So, James," Helena said, handing him another plate to dry. "What exactly did you do in Chicago?" "I worked in real estate," Felipe answered truthfully, though leaving out the part about owning the company. "Sales, mostly." "Real estate?" Helena's eyebrows went up. "That's quite a fall, ending up on our couch." Before Felipe could respond, Jonas walked in, already dressed for his job at the auto repair shop. "Speaking of jobs, when are you planning?" "To look for one. Can't expect to stay here forever." "Jonas!" Louisa appeared behind him. "He just got here yesterday." "And he'd better start looking today," Jonas shot back. "We're not running a charity here." Felipe watched the siblings argue, noting how Louisa always seemed to stand up for others, while Jonas took the harsh, practical approach. Their dynamic reminded him of his own family, before money had changed everything. "Actually," Felipe said, "I was hoping to look for work today. Any suggestions where to start?" Helena dried her hands on a faded dish towel. "The supermarket down on Oak Street is always hiring. It's not real estate, but it's honest work." "Thank you. I'll check it." "Out," Felipe replied, though he had no intention of actually applying for jobs. His plan was to stay only a few days, just long enough to understand Clara's family. Later that morning, while everyone was at work, Felipe sat alone in the living room. Family photos covered the walls: Clara's graduation, Luisa's first communion, Jonas in his high school football uniform, but one photo caught his eye. It showed a younger Helena with a tall, handsome man who had Clara's smile. They were standing in front of a small restaurant, Watson's Family Diner, written above the C door. "That's our dad," Louisa's voice startled him. She had come home early from her college classes before he got sick. "What happened?" Felipe asked softly. Louisa sat down, her usual cheerfulness fading. "Cancer. We had insurance, but it wasn't enough. Dad had to sell the diner to pay for treatments. He still didn't make it." Everything started clicking into place. Jonas's bitterness about money, Helena's worries about finances, Clara's determination to succeed. "The new owners turned it into a parking lot," Louisa continued. "Jonas never forgave them. He says rich people only know how to destroy things that matter to regular folks." Felipe felt his chest tighten. His own company had been involved in similar developments, turning family businesses into profitable commercial spaces. Clara was the one who held us together, Luisa said, picking up another photo. She put her college plans on hold to help Mom with the bills. Even now she sends money home every month from her teaching job. She never told him about that, Felipe said, quickly correcting himself. Luisa gave him a strange look. Told? Who? Oh, just someone I met recently, Felipe fumbled. Before Luisa could question him further, they heard Helena's car in the driveway. She was home early too. James, Helena called out as she entered. Did you look for work today? I was just heading out, Felipe said, grabbing his worn jacket. Wait, Helena's voice had an edge to it. Martha from church works at the supermarket. She says nobody came in asking for jobs today. Felipe felt trapped. I was planning to try other places first. Really? Jonas appeared in the doorway, having come home for lunch. Because I called some buddies at other stores. Nobody's seen you. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Felipe realized his plan was starting to unravel. Look, he started, but Jonas cut him off. No, you look. Jonas stepped closer. Something's not right about you. The way you talk, the way you carry yourself. You're not what you claim to be. Jonas, stop it, Luisa protested. No, Luisa, wake up. Jonas was almost shouting now. First, Clara starts acting strange, running off to fancy restaurants with her mysterious rich boyfriend. Now this guy shows up with his convenient, sad story. It's all connected, I know it is. Felipe stood very still, watching his carefully constructed plan crumbling around him. He hadn't expected Jonas to be so perceptive. Maybe you should leave, Helena said quietly. We've got enough problems without... The sound of the front door opening interrupted her. Clara walked in, still in her teaching clothes, looking confused at finding everyone home early. What's going on? She asked, looking from face to face. Your friend here, Jonas said with contempt, hasn't been looking for work. In fact, I don't think he's done anything he claims to do. Clara turned to Felipe, hurt and confusion in her eyes. James, is this true? Felipe looked at Clara, seeing the trust in her eyes starting to fade. He had wanted to test her family's character, but instead, he was destroying the very thing he had hoped to protect, their trust in Clara. The room fell silent, everyone waiting for his response. Outside, a car alarm went off in the distance, its wailing a perfect backdrop to the moment of truth that was about to unfold. Felipe opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Jonas grabbed his backpack from beside the couch. Let's see who you really are, Jonas said, starting to open it. Felipe's heart raced. In the backpack was his real wallet, his phone, everything that could expose his true identity. He had kept them just in case of emergency, and now that decision was about to blow everything apart. Wait, Clara stepped forward, putting herself between Jonas and Felipe's backpack. This isn't right. Going through someone's private things. Move, Clara, Jonas insisted. Don't you want to know who this guy really is? Felipe's mind raced. He could grab the backpack and run, but that would only confirm their suspicions. He could continue lying, but looking at Clara's face, he couldn't bear to deceive her any longer. Stop, Felipe said quietly. I'll tell you everything. But before he could continue, Luisa gasped, staring at her phone. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God. What is it? Helena asked, moving to look at her daughter's screen. I knew he looked familiar, Luisa said. I just couldn't place it. Look. She turned her phone around. On the screen was a business magazine article with Felipe's photo, the real Felipe, in his expensive suit, announcing his company's latest development project. That's... Clara's voice trailed off as she looked between the phone and Felipe. The color drained from her face. Felipe! The room erupted in chaos. Felipe! You're Felipe! Helena exclaimed. The billionaire boyfriend? Jonas looked ready to explode. I can explain, Felipe started, but Clara cut him off. Don't. Her voice was ice cold. Don't say another word. Tears were forming in her eyes as she backed away from him. The trust they had built over 6 months was shattering in front of him. Clara, please, Felipe reached for her, but she jerked away. You lied to me. You lied to my family. You came into our home under false pretenses. Her voice broke. Was any of it real? Or was this all just some sick game to you? Helena sat heavily in her armchair, looking shell-shocked. All this time, we had a billionaire sleeping on our couch? I wanted to know... Felipe tried to explain, but Jonas cut him off. Know what? How the other half lives? Was this some kind of poverty tourism for you? No, Felipe's voice rose in frustration. I needed to know if you would accept me for who I am, not what I have. Accept you? Jonas laughed bitterly. You're right. We wouldn't have accepted you, not because of your money, but because you're a liar. Clara hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face. You know what the worst part is? She finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I defended you. When Mum and Jonas said something felt off about James, I defended you. I put my trust in a complete stranger because I thought I saw something good in him. You did see something good, Felipe pleaded. Everything I showed you these past days, my compassion, my willingness to help, my interest in your family, that was all real. Real? Luisa spoke up, her usual cheerfulness gone. Real is what Clara does for this family. Real is Mom working 2 jobs after Dad died. Real is Jonas giving up college to keep Dad's diner going until the end. You're just playing pretend. The truth of her words hit Felipe like a physical blow. He had come here to test their character, but they were the ones showing him what character truly meant. Helena stood up slowly. I think you should leave, Mr. Martinez. And please, don't come back. Clara, Felipe tried one last time. I love you. Everything between us was real. This was just what? Clara's voice was hollow. Just a little experiment? Just a way to satisfy your curiosity about how the poor people live? Get out. You really want to know what I think? Jonas stepped closer to Felipe. I think you're worse than the people who bought Dad's diner. At least they were honest about what they were doing. Felipe picked up his backpack, the designer. Label partially visible through the artificial wear he'd created. It all seemed so foolish now. As he walked to the door, he heard Luisa start to cry. The sound broke his heart. He had come here wanting to understand Clara's world, but instead he had brought pain to the people she loved most. Outside, the neighborhood looked different now. The small houses with their tiny gardens weren't just scenery anymore. They were homes filled with real people, real struggles, real love. Felipe reached for his phone to call his driver, then stopped. No, he would walk. He needed time to think about what he had done and what, if anything, he could do to fix it. Back inside, the house. Clara sat on the couch, the same couch where the man she loved had slept while pretending to be someone else. Her mother brought her tea in the chipped Mickey Mouse mug. I'm so sorry, honey, Helena said softly, sitting beside her daughter. I thought he was different, Clara whispered. I thought he saw me, really saw me, for who I am. Jonas paced the room, still angry. I'll make some calls. Make sure he can't hurt anyone else like this. No, Clara said firmly. We're better than that, we always have been. Luisa sat on Clara's other side, laying her head on her sister's shoulder. What are you going to do? Clara looked at the family photos on the wall, at her father's smiling face in front of the diner, at all the memories they had built together. A family that might not have much money, but had something far more valuable. Honesty, loyalty, love. I'm going to do what Dad always taught us, she said quietly. Hold my head high and keep moving forward. As night fell over the neighborhood, Felipe Martinez sat alone in his luxury penthouse, surrounded by everything money could buy. But for the first time in his life, he felt truly poor. A week had passed since Felipe's deception was revealed. Clara hadn't answered any of his calls or texts. The flowers he sent to her school were returned unopened. His emails went unread. In his office, Felipe couldn't focus on work. The view of the city from his window, once a symbol of his success, now felt empty. Sir, his assistant Sarah interrupted his thoughts. The board is waiting for you in the conference room. Felipe straightened his tie and walked into the meeting. The board members were discussing their latest project, a development that would replace an old neighborhood with luxury condos. We've already bought most of the properties, Richard, his head of acquisitions, was saying. Just a few holdouts left. Show me, Felipe said, looking at the map. His heart stopped. The development area was just 3 blocks from Clara's family home. These residents are being unreasonable, Richard continued. They're sitting on worthless properties but demanding ridiculous prices. Felipe remembered Luisa's words about her father's diner, about rich people destroying things that mattered to regular folks. Cancel it, Felipe said suddenly. Excuse me? Cancel the project, all of it. The boardroom erupted in protests. We've already invested millions. The shareholders will revolt. Have you lost your mind? I said cancel it, Felipe's voice was firm, and get me everything you have on Watson's family diner, the one that was torn down 5 years ago. Back at the Watson home, Clara sat at the kitchen table grading papers, or trying to. Her students' stories about their weekend adventures kept blurring as tears filled her eyes. Enough, Helena said, taking the papers away. You need to rest, sweetheart. I can't, Mum. I need to keep busy. Jonas came in from work, his mechanic's uniform stained with oil. You won't believe what I just heard. The big development project near here, it's been cancelled. Just like that. Clara's hand trembled as she reached for her coffee cup. She knew who was behind that decision. There's more, Jonas said. Someone bought the old parking lot where Dad's diner used to be. Guess who? No, Clara whispered. Yeah, your billionaire ex. And you know what else? He's trying to contact all our old customers, the ones who used to come to the diner every day. Helena sat down heavily. What is he playing at now? The answer came the next morning. A large envelope was delivered to their door. Inside were architectural plans, photos of the old diner, and a letter. Dear Watson family, Clara read aloud, her voice shaking. I cannot undo the hurt I've caused, but perhaps I can help restore something that should never have been lost. These are plans to rebuild Watson's family diner exactly as it was. Every detail from the chrome stools to the blue and white tiles your father picked out himself. Luisa grabbed the plans, spreading them on the table. Look, even the old sign. He found photos of everything. Keep reading, Helena said softly. The property will be put in a trust, Clara continued reading. The Watson family will have complete control. I ask for nothing in return. No recognition, no involvement. This isn't about me, it's about making right something that went wrong long before I came into your lives. Jonas snorted. He thinks he can buy our forgiveness? No, Clara said, reading the last part of the letter. He says here, I don't expect this to fix what I broke. Trust once shattered isn't rebuilt with bricks and mortar. But your father's legacy deserves to live on, regardless of how you feel about me. Helena wiped tears from her eyes. Your father would have loved to see his diner standing again. Mom, Jonas protested, you're not seriously considering this. Why not? Luisa jumped in. Dad always said the diner was more than just our family business. It was part of the neighborhood, a place where everyone felt welcome. Clara stayed quiet, staring at the plans. She remembered the stories her father used to tell about starting the diner with just a dream and a loan from her grandfather. How proud he was when they finally paid it off. How he knew every customer by name. The phone rang, making everyone jump. It was Martha from church. Helena, is it true? Martha's excited voice came through the speaker. They're rebuilding the diner. Old Mr. Johnson just called me crying. Says someone contacted him asking about your husband's secret recipe for apple pie. More calls started coming in. Former customers, old employees, neighbors, all sharing memories of the diner, all excited about its return. Maybe, Helena said slowly, we should at least look at the plans properly. Jonas threw up his hands in frustration. Am I the only one who remembers what this man did? How he lied to us? To Clara? No, Clara finally spoke. I remember every minute of it. But I also remember something Dad used to say. Sometimes good people make bad choices, but it's what they do after that shows who they really are. She picked up her phone, looking at Felipe's last message from a week ago. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, let me try. To make things right. Clara's finger hovered over the message. Outside, the sun was setting. painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the same colors she remembered from countless evenings at the diner, watching her father serve late customers, with a smile that never faded. "What are you going to do?" Louisa asked softly. Clara took a deep breath. Sometimes the hardest choices weren't between right and wrong, but between fear and hope, between holding on to hurt and taking a chance on healing. She pressed reply. Clara's message was simple. "Meet me at the diner site tomorrow 7 a.m. Felipe arrived at 6:30, watching the sunrise over the empty parking lot. He had dressed simply today. No designer suit, no expensive watch. Just a plain blue shirt and khakis. He wasn't alone for long. Jonas pulled up in his work truck, stepping out with a thermos of coffee and a suspicious look. "Clara asked me to come," Jonas said before Felipe could speak. "Said we needed to talk man to man." Felipe nodded, accepting the paper cup of coffee Jonas reluctantly offered. It wasn't the fancy Italian roast he was used to, but somehow it tasted better. "You know what I remember most about this place?" Jonas said, looking at the empty lot. "The smell of bacon and coffee at 5 a.m. Dad would let me help open up before school, said it built character." "Tell me more about him," Felipe said quietly. Jonas was silent for a moment. "Why? So you can use it in your next game?" "No, because I want to understand the man who raised the woman I love." Something in Felipe's voice must have reached Jonas, because he sighed and continued. He was the kind of man who would give someone their last dollar if they needed it. When the bank wanted to foreclose on old Mrs. Rodriguez's house, he paid her mortgage for 3 months. Never told anyone. We only found out after he died. More cars started arriving. Regular customers from the old days, carrying photos and memories. Helena and Louisa came with boxes of old menus and newspaper clippings. Everyone gathered in a circle, sharing stories about Thomas Watson and his diner. Clara arrived last, parking her old Toyota next to Felipe's Mercedes. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone. "Before we make any decisions," Clara addressed the crowd, "I want everyone to share their honest thoughts. This diner wasn't just ours, it belonged to all of you too." For the next hour, Felipe listened as person after person spoke about what Watson's family diner had meant to them. "My husband proposed to me at that corner booth," said Mrs. Rodriguez, pointing to the empty space. "Thomas gave us free pie to celebrate. I learned to read using those menus," a young man named Mike shared. "Mr. Watson would quiz me every morning while my mom had her coffee before work. He let me run a tab for 6 months when I lost my job," another man added. Said, "Good people help each other through hard times." Felipe watched Clara's face as she listened to the stories. She was crying, but smiling too. Finally, Clara turned to Felipe. "Your turn. Why are you really doing this?" Everyone fell silent, waiting for his answer. "When I first started my company," Felipe began, "I believed success was measured by profit margins and stock prices. But being here in your home, even under false pretenses, I learned what real success looks like. It's not about what you build. It's about why you build it." He looked around at the faces watching him. Thomas Watson didn't just run a diner. He built a community. He created a place where everyone felt valued, regardless of what was in their wallet. "I've constructed million-dollar buildings that have never meant as much as this empty parking lot means to all of you." Helena stepped forward. "And what happens when you get bored with this project? When it stops being about making yourself feel better?" "That's why I'm putting everything in a trust," Felipe explained. "Once it's rebuilt, the diner belongs to the Watson family completely. I'll have no control over it." "And Clara?" Jonas asked. "What about her?" Felipe turned to Clara, his heart in his throat. "Clara is free to make her own choices. If she never wants to see me again, I'll respect that. The diner isn't about winning her back. It's about making right what should never have been wrong." Clara walked to the center of the lot, where the counter used to be. She could almost hear the coffee cups clinking, the friendly chatter, her father's laughing voice calling out orders. "When Dad got sick," she said, her voice carrying in the morning air, "he made me promise something. Not that I'd keep the diner going. He knew that might not be possible. He made me promise to always look for the good in people, even when it's hard to find." She turned to Felipe. "What you did, coming into our home under false pretenses. That was wrong. But why you did it, wanting to know if we'd love you for yourself, not your money. I understand that now. Felipe felt hope rising in his chest, but Clara wasn't finished. If we do this, she continued, it has to be different. No more lies. No more games, no more trying to test each other. Just truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I promise, Felipe said. Don't promise yet, Clara held up her hand. First, you need to do something. Anything. Clara's eyes were steel. Come to dinner tonight as yourself. No designer clothes, no fancy car, just Felipe. Meet my family properly, answer their questions honestly, and let them decide if they can trust you again. The crowd watched in silence like an audience at a play reaching its climax. And if they can't, Felipe asked softly, then we'll still rebuild the diner, because Dad's legacy deserves that. But you and me, we'll have our answer. Felipe looked at the faces around him. Helena's cautious hope, Jonas's protective suspicion, Louisa's eager optimism, and Clara, strong and beautiful in the morning light, giving him one last chance to prove himself. What time is dinner? He asked. Clara smiled for the first time. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. And Felipe, bring yourself this time. Just yourself. That's all we ever wanted. As the crowd began to disperse, making plans to return for the groundbreaking, Felipe stayed rooted to his spot. Tonight would determine everything. No wealth to hide behind. No fake identity to protect him. Just a man asking a family to believe in him one more time. The old parking lot wasn't just a construction site anymore. It was holy ground, where second chances grew from the ashes of old mistakes, and maybe, just maybe, where love could bloom again, stronger and truer than before. At exactly 6:55 p.m., Felipe stood on the Watsons' porch again. This time, he wore a simple cotton shirt and jeans he'd bought from the mall. No designer labels, no expensive watch. In his hands, he held a homemade apple pie. You baked? Clara asked when she opened the door, surprised by the pie. I called the diner's old baker, Margaret. Spent all afternoon learning your father's recipe, Felipe admitted. I probably got it wrong, but you went to Margaret? Helena appeared behind Clara. That woman hasn't baked since Thomas died. She said it was time, Felipe replied softly. Said Mr. Watson would have wanted his recipe to live on. Helena's eyes softened slightly as she took the pie. Well, come in then. No point standing on the porch all night. The house looked different now that Felipe wasn't pretending to be. James. The worn furniture and faded wallpaper weren't signs of poverty anymore. They were pieces of a home filled with memories. Jonas sat in his father's old armchair, arms crossed. So, Felipe Martinez, ready to tell us who you really are? Jonas, Clara warned, but Felipe held up his hand. No, he's right. Ask me anything. I'm an open book tonight. Why'd you really come here? Louisa asked, sitting cross-legged on the floor. The truth this time. Felipe looked at each face in the room before answering. Because I was afraid. I've had 2 serious relationships before Clara. Both times, once they learned. About my money, everything changed. They started wanting things, expensive gifts, social connections, status. They stopped seeing me. So you thought we'd be the same? Helena asked. I thought everyone was the same, Felipe admitted. Until I met Clara. She treated me differently from the start. Like I was just a person, not a bank account. But you still didn't trust us, Jonas pointed out. No, I didn't. And that was my biggest mistake. Felipe turned to Clara. I was so focused on testing your family that I forgot the most important thing. I was betraying your trust in the process. Helena went to check on dinner, and the smell of her famous meatloaf filled the house. It was Clara's favorite meal as a child, she had told Felipe once. Tell us about your own family, Helena called from the kitchen. The real story this time. Felipe took a deep breath. My father built our company from nothing. He was hard. Success was everything to him. When he died 10 years ago, I inherited everything. My mother lives in Europe now. We talk maybe twice a year. Must be lonely, Louisa said quietly. It was, until I walked into that charity event and saw a beautiful teacher getting into an argument with a donor about education funding. Clara blushed. He wanted to cut art programs. He was wrong. You told him he had no idea what children really needed. Felipe smiled at the memory. You didn't care that he was on the board of directors. You just cared about your students. Helena returned, wiping her hands on her apron. Dinner's ready. Felipe, would you help me set the table? In the kitchen, Helena handed him plates. The good ones, Felipe noticed, not the everyday set. You know, Helena said quietly, Thomas would have liked your gesture with the diner, not because it's grand, but because you're thinking about the community, not just the building. I wish I could have met him, Felipe replied. Oh, you have, Helena smiled slightly. Through his children, through Clara. The best parts of him live on in them. At the dinner table, the conversation flowed more easily. Felipe told them about his first failed business venture, a pet grooming app that no one wanted. Luisa shared her college struggles, and Felipe offered to help her study economics. Even Jonas grudgingly admitted that Felipe's car restoration hobby was kind of cool. Then Helena brought out the apple pie. It looks just like Dad's, Clara whispered, touching the perfectly crimped edges. Margaret said I had to do it 7 times before it was right, Felipe admitted. She's a tough teacher. Helena cut the first slice and everyone watched as she took a bite. Her eyes filled with tears. Thomas, she whispered. It tastes just like Thomas made it. The pie was passed around, each bite bringing back memories of Sunday dinners and special celebrations at the diner. You know, Jonas said, finally breaking the emotional silence, Dad always said you could tell a person's character by how they handle 3 things: failure, success, and pie crust. Everyone laughed, the tension finally breaking. Felipe, Helena said, setting down her fork. What you did coming here as James, it was wrong. But what you're doing now, being honest, trying to make amends, bringing a piece of Thomas back to us through this pie, that's something we can work with. Does this mean... Felipe looked hopefully at Clara. It means, Clara reached for his hand under the table, that we're willing to try again, the right way this time. With one condition, Jonas added firmly. No more tests, no more games. You want to be part of this family? You deal with us exactly as we are. And how's that? Felipe asked. Luisa grinned. Loud, messy, and always ready to call each other out when we're being stupid. Speaking of which, Helena stood up. Whose turn is it to do the dishes? I'll do them, Felipe volunteered. I'll help, Clara said, following him to the kitchen. As they stood side by side at the sink, Clara bumped his shoulder gently. You know this doesn't fix everything, right? I know, Felipe nodded. But it's a start. It's a start, Clara agreed. A real one this time. From the dining room, they could hear Luisa and Jonas arguing about whose turn it really was to do the dishes, while Helena reminded them both about the time they broke her favorite serving bowl during a similar argument. Felipe smiled, his hands deep. In soapy water, his designer watch left at home, his heart fuller than it had ever been. This, he realized, was what he'd been looking for all along. Not acceptance of his wealth, but inclusion in a family's everyday moments, their real lives, their honest love. Clara handed him another plate to wash, and in the simple act of doing dishes together, Felipe Martinez, billionaire CEO, real estate mogul, and a man learning to be simply himself, found a piece he never knew he was missing. The construction site was buzzing with activity. 1 month had passed since the family dinner, and the foundation of Watson's family diner was taking shape. Felipe stood with Clara, both wearing hard hats, as they watched the workers pour concrete. The booths will be right there, Clara pointed, her eyes bright with memories. Dad used to let me help him wipe them down every morning before school. And the counter? Felipe asked, though he already knew. He'd memorized every detail from the old photos. There, running from end to end, 12 chrome stools with red leather tops. Actually, Jonas's voice came from behind them. He was carrying rolled-up blueprints. It was 13 stools. Lucky number 13, Dad always said. Felipe smiled. In the past month, Jonas had slowly started warming up to him. It began when Felipe asked him to oversee the construction, trusting his knowledge of the original diner and his experience in hands-on work. These just came from the manufacturer, Jonas said, unrolling the blueprints. They can replicate the original chrome fixtures exactly. Helena and Louisa arrived with lunch for everyone, homemade sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, just like they used to serve at the diner. Mrs. Rodriguez called again, Helena told them as they sat on makeshift benches. She wants to know if we're still planning to have the same Christmas decorations her husband helped Dad put up every year. Every single one, Clara promised. The light-up Santa, the tinsel garlands, even that crooked star for the window. Felipe watched the family discuss details of the diner, each memory bringing them closer together. His phone buzzed, another message from his board of directors, questioning his dedication to this small-time project. He ignored it. Felipe? Luisa's voice pulled him back. Earth to Felipe. Sorry, what? I asked if you've thought about my idea for the scholarship program. After learning about Felipe's business background, Luisa had proposed setting up a college scholarship fund as part of the diner's reopening. It would help local kids, just like her father used to do quietly over the years. I think it's perfect, Felipe said. We can announce it at the grand opening. Speaking of the opening, Helena interjected, we need to talk about the menu. This was a sensitive topic. Everyone had different memories of Thomas's recipes, and emotions ran high when discussing which versions to use. I have an idea, Felipe said carefully. What if we gather all the old customers, have a tasting day, let them help us recreate the recipes exactly as they remember? Clara squeezed his hand under the table. A month ago, he would have just hired expensive consultants to figure it out. Now he understood. The diner wasn't just about food, it was about community. That's actually a good idea, Jonas admitted. Later that afternoon, as the workers were finishing for the day, an elderly man approached the site. He was well dressed, leaning on a cane. Can I help you? Felipe asked. Just wanted to see it, the man said, his eyes misty. I was Thomas Watson's banker back in the day. Gave him his first loan to open this place. Helena rushed over. Mr. Phillips, is that really you? The old banker nodded. Helen, you look just like you did 30 years ago. I've been following the stories about the rebuilding in the paper. Had to come see for myself. Would you like a tour? Felipe offered. As they showed Mr. Phillips around, he shared stories about Thomas Watson that even the family hadn't heard. How Thomas had helped other small business owners by co-signing their loans. How he'd kept a box of cash in his office to help regular customers through tough times. Your father, Mr. Phillips told Clara, understood that business wasn't just about money. It was about people. Felipe felt Clara's hand slip into his. They'd been taking things slow, rebuilding their trust day by day. Sometimes she still got quiet, remembering his deception. But more often now, she looked at him with growing confidence in who he really was. Oh my, Mr. Phillips said, reaching the counter area. Will you have the same setup, with the coffee makers right here? Everything exactly the same, Jonasy assured him. We've even found the original supplier for the coffee beans. Your father used to let me taste test new blends, the banker chuckled, said my refined palate made me the perfect coffee critic. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the construction site, more old customers started arriving. Word had spread that Mr. Phillips was visiting, and people brought their own memories to share. Someone produced an old guitar. Apparently, there used to be live music on Friday nights. A spontaneous gathering formed, with people sitting on construction materials sharing stories and songs. This is it, Clara whispered to Felipe. This is what Dad created. Not just a diner, but a place where everyone belongs. Felipe watched as Helena passed around cups of coffee from a thermos, as Luisa wrote down stories for the diner's new website, as Jonas explained the construction plans to interested neighbors. This was what real wealth looked like, not the numbers in his bank account, but the rich tapestry of lives woven together through decades of shared meals and memories. We're doing it right, he said softly. Aren't we? Clara looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the setting sun. Yes, we are, both the diner and us. On the edge of the construction site, Mr. Phillips raised his coffee cup in a toast. To Thomas Watson, he called out, and to new beginnings. To new beginnings, everyone echoed, and Felipe felt it in his heart. He was building more than a diner here. He was building a home, a future, and a legacy that would make Thomas Watson proud. 2 weeks before the diner's grand reopening, Felipe sat in his office, reviewing the final details. The chrome fixtures were installed, the vintage style. Booths were perfect, and Helena had approved the last of the kitchen equipment. Everything was going according to plan, until Richard, his head of acquisitions, burst through the door. "We have a problem," Richard said, dropping a thick folder on Felipe's desk. A big one. Inside the folder were documents about the original sale of Watson's Diner. As Felipe read through them, his face grew pale. "This can't be right," he muttered. "It is," Richard confirmed. "When Thomas Watson sold the diner, there was a clause in the contract. If the property ever became a restaurant again, the original buying company gets first right of purchase. And guess who owns that company now?" Felipe's hands clenched into fists. Michael Davis. Michael Davis, Felipe's biggest rival in real estate development, had been trying to take over Felipe's company for years. Now he had the legal power to stop the diner from reopening. "He's already filed the paperwork," Richard added. "He's offering triple the market value for the property." Felipe's phone rang. It was Clara. "Felipe, there's a man here at the diner site. He says he owns the property and we have to stop construction immediately." Felipe's heart sank. "I'm on my way. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Just wait for me." When Felipe arrived at the diner, Michael Davis was standing in the middle of the nearly finished dining room, wearing an expensive suit and a smug smile. Jonas was being held back by 2 construction workers, looking ready to punch Davis in the face. "Felipe," Davis called out cheerfully. "Quite a cute little project you've got here. Very charitable of you." "What do you want, Michael?" Felipe demanded. "Want? I'm just exercising my legal rights." Davis ran his finger along the gleaming new counter. "Though I might be persuaded to look the other way if you're willing to discuss the merger we talked about last year." Clara stepped forward. "What merger, Felipe? What's he talking about?" Davis's smile widened. "Oh, you didn't tell your new family. A year ago, I offered to merge our companies. Felipe refused, cost his shareholders millions, but now..." He spread his arms, gesturing at the diner. "Now he has a weakness." Helena put her arm around Clara. "Felipe, what's going on?" Felipe looked at the faces around him. Clara's confusion, Jonas's anger, Helena's concern, Luisa's fear. He had promised them no more secrets. "Davis wants my company," Felipe explained. "He's been trying to take it over for years. This clause about the diner, he's using it as leverage." "Smart man," Davis smirked. "So, what's it going to be? Your company stays independent, but you lose the diner, or we merge and your little project can continue." The room fell silent. Felipe looked around at all the work they'd done, the hand-picked tiles that matched the original ones from Clara's childhood photos, the restored signs that Thomas Watson had hung himself, the booth where Mrs. Rodriguez's husband had proposed. "You know what the worst part is?" Davis continued. "Your father would have made this deal in a heartbeat, business first always. Isn't that what he taught you?" Felipe felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him. His father would have chosen the company. It was the smart business decision. The diner was just one small property while his company was worth billions. But then he remembered Mr. Phillips's words about Thomas Watson, understanding that business wasn't just about money. He thought about all the stories he'd heard about Clara's father helping others, putting community before profit. "No," Felipe said firmly. "No?" Davis raised an eyebrow. "No to what?" "No to all of it. No to the merger, no to selling the diner, no to letting you destroy something that matters to this community." "You don't have a choice," Davis laughed. "The contract is clear." Actually, a new voice spoke up from the diner's entrance. "He does." Everyone turned to see Mr. Phillips standing there, leaning on his cane, holding an old leather briefcase. "Martin Phillips," the old banker introduced himself to Davis. "I was Thomas Watson's banker and friend, and I've been waiting 30 years to reveal a secret." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a yellow document. The night before Thomas signed the sale papers, he came to me. He knew he was dying, knew he had to sell to pay for his treatment, but he also knew someday someone might want to rebuild. So we added a second clause. Felipe took the document with trembling hands. As he read it, his eyes widened. The right. A first purchase, Mr. Phillips explained to everyone, can be overridden if the new restaurant carries the Watson name and is operated by a member of the Watson family. Davis snatched the paper, reading it frantically. His face turned red. This is impossible. No, Helena said softly. This is Thomas, always thinking ahead, always protecting his family. The diner will be run by the Watson family, Felipe announced. I'm just the investor. The trust we set up puts everything in their name, their control. Davis crumpled the paper in his fist. You'll regret this, Martinez. Both of you. He stormed out, nearly knocking over a stack of new menus. After he left, Felipe turned to Clara. I'm sorry I never told you about the merger offer. I didn't think it mattered anymore. No more secrets, Clara reminded him. No more secrets, Felipe promised. Ever. Mr. Phillips cleared his throat. Thomas asked me to wait until the diner was almost ready before revealing this. He said, when the time comes, the right person will rebuild. Someone who understands that a business is about more than the bottom line. Helena wiped tears from her eyes. He knew. Somehow he knew this day would come. Jonas, who had been quiet, finally spoke. Davis will try something else. Men like him always do. Let him try, Felipe said, putting his arm around Clara. Some things are worth fighting for. As the sun set through the diner's newly installed windows, the family gathered around the counter. Helena poured coffee into the new cups that matched the old ones perfectly. The smell of fresh coffee and new beginnings filled the air. 2 weeks, Louisa said excitedly. 2 weeks until we open those doors again. Clara leaned her head on Felipe's shoulder. Dad would be proud of all of us. Felipe looked around at his new family, at the diner that had brought them all together, and knew he'd made the right choice. Some legacies were worth more than all the money in the world. But in the back of his mind, he knew Jonas was right. Michael Davis wouldn't give up easily. The next 2 weeks would test them all in ways they couldn't imagine. The morning of Watson's family diner's grand reopening dawned bright and clear. Clara stood in front of the mirror in her childhood bedroom, pinning on the same style of name tag her father had worn for 20 years. Ready, sweetheart? Helena appeared in the doorway, already wearing her apron. Her eyes were misty. You look just like him. Before Clara could respond, Louisa burst in. You need to see this, right now. They rushed downstairs and out to the front of the diner. A line of people stretched around the block. Old customers, neighbors, families. Some had been waiting since dawn. Penny held old photos of themselves at the original diner. Look who's first in line, Jonas called out, pointing. It was Michael Davis, but not the smug businessman from 2 weeks ago. This Davis looked haunted, tired, clutching an old photo in his hands. I need to talk to you, he said when Clara approached. All of you. Inside the diner, Davis laid the photo on the counter. It showed a much younger version of himself in a Watson's diner uniform. I worked here, he said quietly. Summer job back in high school. Your father, he looked at Clara. He caught me stealing from the register. Helena gasped, but Davis continued. I was sure he'd call the police. Instead, he sat me down in that corner booth and asked why. I told him the truth. My mum was sick, we couldn't afford her medicine. You know what he did? Clara thought she knew, but she let Davis finish. He gave me an advance on my salary, helped my mum find better doctors, said everyone deserves a second chance. Davis's voice cracked. I forgot that somewhere along the way. Got so focused on winning that I forgot what your father taught me. Felipe, who had been listening silently, stepped forward. What are you saying, Michael? I'm saying I'm withdrawing everything. The legal challenge, the threats, all of it. Davis pulled out an envelope. And I'm making a donation to the scholarship fund. It's time I paid back what Thomas Watson gave me. Helena touched the old photo gently. I remember you now. Thomas said you had a good heart, just needed someone to believe in you. He was right about a lot of things, Davis smiled sadly. Don't let me keep you. You've got a diner to open." As Davis left through the back door, Felipe caught up with him. "The merger offer was a mistake," Davis finished. "Your company's doing fine on its own. Better than fine, now that you've remembered what really matters in business." At exactly 6 a.m., just like Thomas Watson had done every morning for 20 years, Clara unlocked the front doors of Watson's family diner. The first hour was a blur of happiness and tears. Old customers found their favorite booths, exclaiming over every detail that matched their memories. Mrs. Rodriguez cried when she saw that her special booth had a small plaque commemorating her engagement. In the kitchen, Helena and the old cook Margaret worked side by side, every dish coming out exactly as people remembered. Jonas ran the register, greeting everyone by name just like his father had. Felipe stayed in the background, watching his new family shine. Clara moved between tables with her father's easy grace, remembering everyone's usual orders, making every person feel special. "Quite a woman you've got there," Mr. Phillips said, settling onto his old favorite stool at the counter. "Yes, she is," Felipe agreed. "They all are. This whole family." "Speaking of family," Mr. Phillips nodded toward the door. Felipe's mother stood there looking uncertain. He had invited her, but hadn't really expected her to come. "Felipe," she said softly, "this is not what I expected." "Good different. Or bad different?" She watched as Luisa rushed to get her an apron, as Helena welcomed her with a warm hug, as Clara introduced her to regular customers as Felipe's mum. "Good different," she smiled. "Very good different." The morning rush was in full swing when Clara clinked a coffee cup with a spoon, calling for attention. "First," she announced, "I want to thank everyone who helped make this day possible. The contractors who worked overtime to match every detail, the suppliers who hunted down original equipment, the old staff who shared their recipes and memories." She paused, looking at Felipe. "And one man who reminded us that sometimes the biggest dreams come true in the most unexpected ways." Felipe felt his face flush as people applauded. "But most of all," Clara continued, "I want to thank my father, not just for building this diner the first time, but for building something much more important, a legacy of love, kindness, and second chances." She picked up a frame from behind the counter, the old photo of Thomas Watson in front of his diner on opening day. As she hung it in its place of honor, sunlight caught the glass, making it glow. "The Watson family has always believed that good food feeds the body, but kindness feeds the soul," Clara said. "That tradition continues today, and every day at E. Watson's family diner." Later that evening, after the crowds had thinned, the family sat in their favorite booth. Helena's meatloaf, Thomas's secret recipe apple pie, and fresh coffee covered the table. "You know what Dad would say right now?" Jonas asked, his earlier gruffness replaced with contentment. "Who's going to do all these dishes?" Luisa laughed. "Remember to count the register twice," Helena added. "Love is the secret ingredient," Clara said softly, squeezing Felipe's hand under the table. Felipe looked around at his new family, at the diner filled with love and memories, at the community that had welcomed him once he stopped pretending to be someone else. "I have something to ask you," he said to Clara. "And this time I'm asking with no pretense, no hidden tests, just my whole heart." He slid out of the booth and went down on one knee, pulling out a small box. But inside wasn't a flashy diamond ring. Instead, it held a simple gold band with tiny coffee cups engraved around it. "Clara Watson, will you marry me? Right here in your father's diner, surrounded by everything and everyone that matters?" Clara looked at the ring, at her family's smiling faces, at the man kneeling before her, the real Felipe, the one who had learned that true wealth isn't in a bank account, but in the hearts of those you love. "Yes," she whispered, "1,000 times yes." As they kissed, the evening sun streamed through the windows, catching the frame on the wall. For just a moment, Thomas Watson's smile seemed to shine even brighter, blessing this new chapter in his family's story. Outside, the neon open sign buzzed warmly against the darkening sky. Watson's family diner was back, its legacy of love and second chances ready to serve the next generation. And at a small table in the corner, Michael Davis sat quietly, finishing his coffee remembering a man who had once given him a second chance, and smiling at the knowledge that Thomas Watson's spirit of kindness lived on. But the end.